The meeting will begin in 1 minute. The meeting will begin in 1 minute. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Tuesday informational meeting. It is Tuesday, July 17th. We'll call this meeting to order. First order of business is the UDC update. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. I'm going to try to not pull a Rex and make it too long. So it was our first meeting for myself and Councillor Brecky, and Pat Starr is still on the committee. We talked about a couple of studies that are being funded. One is for a Lincoln County master plan, and another one is for a road that would go between Veterans Parkway on the west and Brandon on the east. That would be a Maple Street extension. There's going to be quite a bit of traffic on that road going into the future. We also talked about funding for studies of the I-229 interchanges, Minnesota and Cliff Avenue. Those continue. We approved a letter of support that's being sent to the feds, to the U.S. Department of Transportation, asking for a build grant, and that would be for 471st Street. That would be the road that's on in T that goes over to I-229. It has, I believe, something like 11,000 cars per day. It's well over its capacity. It needs to be expanded to 4 lanes, and looking for funding to do that. And we looked at the TIP, the 2019 to 2022 TIP, which is the Transportation Improvement Plan, which is essentially all of the major road projects that area municipalities will be working on in the next 4 years. So good meeting. Thanks.
Thank you for the update. Appreciate that. Next item is open discussion. Anything for open discussion? Councillor Neitzer.
Yeah, I just had a meeting earlier today with HR, and I just wanted to let you know that as I've become chair of the audit committee, one of the things that I'm finding is it's the first time I'm dealing with quote unquote supervising employees. And so I'm working with them, and they have essentially, it's called a supervisor training that they'll do for their city employees. It's a whole day training, but what they're gonna do is they're gonna condense it down to 2 or 3 hours and kind of really hit the things that would really help us, and then they can get feedback. I'm looking for any input, and you can contact me individually or however you'd like to do it, but be something where anybody who becomes a chair of a committee, particularly a committee where you're going to have to supervise people, staff, where it will give you some of those tools that you can deal with things like the performance review process and all of the different things that you have to deal with as a supervisor, because some of us come from different backgrounds and HR may not be our deal, but they're going to try to get it focused into something that's a short presentation where you can kind of get everything you need to know in a couple of hours. It wouldn't be required. It would be just essentially, every year or two, when we switch over, it'd be at your, if you want it, it's there. And so they get kind of a canned presentation ready. And then as they go forward, anybody who comes onto a committee and becomes a chair that would like it can go through it if they would like to have some of those tools so that they can have things with dealing with the employees and all of those interactions. And it would also benefit our staff as well, because obviously they have new supervisors every year or two, and then hopefully having some continuity as far as how certain things are handled. So just to give us some of those tools. Again, not required, but it would just be there as a resource. So,
thank you. Anything else for open discussion? Counselor?
I just have one announcement. Just a reminder, last week we had mentioned we will not have a land use committee meeting this afternoon following this meeting, and that still holds true. We are not going to have a land use committee meeting, so thank you.
Anyone else? Counselor Staley.
And it's next week that we're moving into the county building?
Yep, I've got a couple announcements.
You're going to announce that for?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, good.
Anything else? Okay, seeing none. I've got a couple announcements. One, the budget address will be Tuesday, July 31st at 2:30 in the downtown library, meeting rooms A and B. This is open to the public. Budget address Tuesday, July 31st, 2:30. We all did get a calendar invite, but I want to make it clear for the public as well. The other reminder is that next week we will be moving our joint city-county meeting to 4 o'clock, and then the informational meeting will take place after that. And this is at the Minnehaha County Commission Room due to the changes here in Carnegie for the system upgrades. Anything else for public or for open discussion? Seeing none, we'll move on to our first presentation, Planning Development Services, who we are. Director Cooper, thank you for coming.
Good afternoon, I'm Mike Cooper. This is a attempt to kind of update the council, other interested persons about the reorganization that recently occurred between community development departments and what was planning and building services. And so now the new brand is Planning and Development Services. Talking today about that organizational structure, the functions, the key players, so that going forward you'll continue to know what we, not only who we are, but what we do and what kind of issues you can contact us in regard to. So the first part of this slide is that we maintain our planning and zoning functions, current and long-range planning, transportation planning, historic preservation, the visual arts, special projects that may involve other city departments, our public transit system that we also oversee our third-party contract for managing the transit system, zoning enforcement, a strong focus on downtown as well as neighborhood development projects. Our Chief Planning and Zoning Official is Jeff Schmidt, and if he's behind me, he has raised his hand. We have urban planners, we have a graphic design specialist, administrative assistant, part-time office assistant, and then Shauna Goldhammer is our zoning enforcement manager, and we have our zoning enforcement officers, which spend a lot of time at City Center reviewing plans for permits and future inspections, and then also going out in the field and doing inspections, as well as dealing with complaints regarding the zoning ordinance requirements. We have a number of boards and commissions that we provide staff support under Planning and Zoning. Planning Commission, our Zoning Board of Adjustment, our Board of Historic Preservation, the Visual Arts Commission, our Public Transit Advisory Board. We participate in our MPO committees, and then we also help support the City Naming Committee. Our Building Services Division is essentially unchanged with this merger. We still focus on plan review, permits, inspections, and then licensing of our contractors. And we were fortunate that we've had a number of our chief officials come and do presentations, which I think was a really good experience, not only for them, but also for the council, and we'll continue to look at those opportunities going forward. So Butch Warrington is here in the brightly colored shirt, and he's our Chief Building Services official. We have 4 divisions of our inspectors: mechanical, building, electrical, and plumbing. We have our plan examiners, our permit technicians. And so within our 4 divisions, we have a Chief Building Inspector, Neil King, with building, Chief Mechanical Inspector, Gary Clarenbeek, who you've met, Larry Kippis, our Chief Electrical Inspector, who you've met, and Mark Polly, our Chief Plumbing Inspector, who has also done a presentation to the council. I think the 2 newest councils maybe have not met these folks yet, but again, we'll be looking at opportunities to have our team come forward in the next few council meetings to talk about what they do in more detail. So boards and commissions with building services. We have a building board of appeals, which is a appointed group that would look at interpretations or questions about our building code. And then the same with the other three boards, our electrical board of appeals and examiners, mechanical board of appeals and examiners, and plumbing board of appeals and examiners. And those other three, since there are testing, we have testing for different trades and contractors, and so those also are reviewed by our citizen-appointed boards. Neighborhood services, this is a new name that we're putting out to kind of take the place of code enforcement. We want to look at more of a broad scope as we've merged community development with planning and building services. So the neighborhood services umbrella would continue to include code compliance, property maintenance. We'll still work on our vegetation and sidewalk snow removal enforcement, the rental registration program. But then we would also be looking at expanding more into neighborhood programs, working with neighborhood associations or other interest groups on not just enforcement, but also looking at ways that we can engage individuals, property owners, neighborhoods to be more proactive about issues or concerns that they have. So this is one area that we're really excited about, kind of putting a new brand on it and making it a little broader scope than just code enforcement. Oops. So our neighborhood services manager is Matt Tobias. Adam Roach came to us from community development as a neighborhood services coordinator. Brad Hartman, code compliance officer. And then we have our chief property maintenance inspector, Kelly Boyson, with our other inspectors. And then we also utilize Ryan Sage with the attorney's office as a key part of our team who works with us on code compliance and other neighborhood issues. So we wanted to make sure that he's recognized as part of our team. And then we have a property maintenance board of appeals to meet on issues that would come up regarding, again, interpretation or issues regarding that property maintenance code. And then affordable housing is now part of our team. Affordable housing has a number of defined programs that has been in the works for some time. The single-family rehab program, the neighborhood revitalization program, the Bright Futures and tenant-based rental assistance, the home buyer assistance, furnace replacement program, mobile home repair, and rental property rehab. Les Kinstead is here. He's our affordable housing manager. And then we have our program specialists along with a finance accountant who helps our affordable housing team. They are located on second floor of City Hall. They've moved from the lower level of Carnegie Town Hall. The rest of the team is in the new City Center building. Boards and commissions for affordable housing. We have our Affordable Housing Advisory Board, and then we also have our Sioux Falls Housing and Redevelopment Commission that we provide staff support to. So that's a very quick overview, and we are working on an updated org chart. I know Councilor Erickson had asked about that. That gives more specific players, so we'll be providing that in the near future.
Great.
So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an understanding of what planning and development services is going forward.
Sounds good.
Any
Thank
questions?
you. Any questions from the council? Councilor Staley.
First of all, congratulations on becoming the head of the two departments. I think you'll do a great job.
Thank you. We have a good team.
Question, you didn't mention the community development funds that we've had in the past where people could apply to get low-cost loans or grants for fixing windows, fixtures. That wasn't on the chart. Is that still available?
These are the programs that we've had in place for some time, and maybe I'll have Les come up, and if you have a specific.
No, I just didn't
program?
see that whole you got the furniture replacement program, but I didn't see the whole package of the community development housing thing. Should that be a bullet point on there as well, perhaps?
Are you talking about single family or rental or?
Single family.
Single family. So we have single family rehab, which is probably what you're talking about.
Les, is that what I'm talking about?
I'm Les Kinston, I'm the Affordable Housing Manager for the city. Yes, Councilor, that's the single-family rehab program. It's the same program we've had, and it'll still operate under Mike, and I'll be working with the program on a day in and day out basis with the staff as well.
But in the past, they've sent out a little thing with the water bill. That's all going to be the same. The funds are the same.
Yep.
Nothing's changed.
Same stuff, just in a different
Okay.
organizational structure.
Okay, thank you. Because I think that's a fabulous opportunity to encourage people to update their homes. Okay, then the next thing is neighborhood associations. I know that several years ago we had, after Mayor Huther was installed, there was a big push for associations. And I haven't heard as much about that recently. Are you still having, like, you had one person designated to kind of encourage that? It was even taking a little precedence over the Neighborhood Watch program.
Yeah, that's Adam Roach, and again, he's still part of our team, is our neighborhood.
Are we still actively trying to create new neighborhood associations, or is it where are we at, or is it Neighborhood Watch now?
I would say we're more actively working with the associations that we have, which are some 22 or 23. And that keeps us pretty busy. But if anybody, we continue to get the word out about neighborhood associations, what they can offer. And so as different parts of the community come forward, we are open to working with them. But Adam Roach would be kind of the lead person on what we're now calling the neighborhood programs.
Okay.
Yep.
And then, coming off of that, I will say the Oakview neighborhood, and I don't know, are they an association?
Yes. Yes.
They came together as a result of that zoning issue, and I mean, I've been so impressed with what they've been doing to help the community. They even did a mayoral forum, which was really kind of neat. And then I was able to go to the All Saints neighborhood, and my gosh, they've got like 1,000 people on their email list within that neighborhood group, and they've also partnered with All Saints at Waterford, and it's really impressive.
It's a nice program.
Very impressed. So the last thing I guess I wanted to say is that, and I'm going to be talking to the mayor about this, but I would really like to see a customer care representative in our community for our government. The hospitals have, if you are a patient in a hospital and you have a problem, they have people who reach out and help you to negotiate among the administration and the doctors. And I think it'd be so wonderful if we had someone in our community, within our government, who could be like an ombudsman, who would hear complaints from citizens. I'm fielding those right now. I know a lot of us are hearing from people who have, some of them have questions about zoning. They feel like they've been mistreated. A lot of the calls I get are from people who've had negative experiences with the city, and they just need another set of eyes to kind of help, another advocate. So I just wanted to say that. I don't know that that comes out of your department necessarily, but it would affect your department because you've got so many different ways of dealing with the public. So just wanted to put that out there.
Okay.
Any other questions for Director Cooper? I have one, well, maybe two. With Adam Roach, he really has focused a lot downtown. Will he continue to focus on that downtown as well?
Actually, Dustin Powers is going to be our main downtown person.
Okay.
Within the planning office, the planning section, yep.
Okay, makes sense, thank you. And then talk to me a little bit about what will happen with TIF. Who will be the liaison for that, and who will be the person that if applicant comes in, where does the application go? Who is administering that? Is that in your department, or where does that go?
Yeah, it'll be a combination of planning as well as the mayor's chief of staff office.
Okay.
That will work together on TIF proposals, TIF applications. But our office would be more the administration as far as taking them through planning commission and city council.
Makes sense.
Yep. And then I did not mention that One of our results of this reorganization is that the parking folks went to police department. So they are moving over to the police department as the parking enforcement. And so they'll be moving out of Carnegie as well
So
to City Hall.
who will parking,
Matt Nelson will continue to be the manager for the parking system.
and he'll report directly to Chief Burns or someone else?
He'll be reporting to somebody intermediate between Chief Burns. I don't know who that exact person is.
A person between,
Yep.
okay. Thank you. Any other
But
questions?
we'll continue to work with downtown Sioux Falls on parking issues,
Right.
so that won't go away, yeah.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move to our next item. Thank you so much. This is always helpful, and especially with the new changes to your department. I'm sure more questions will come up, and we look forward to getting the new org chart when that is completed. Thank you. Our next item is the rail yard update, notification of offer to purchase. Welcome, Dustin and Mike Cooper.
I'm going to kick this off, but we're going to divide this presentation today into 3 parts. The first part will be more of a background of kind of giving an overview of where we started and how we got to this point. Then we'll hear from the folks here more specific about the development proposal that we're all excited about. And then Dustin will be going through the third part of the presentation to overview the different action items that will be taken forward for City Council consideration and the timeline for that. So again, I'm Mike Cooper with Planning and Development Services, and in the fall of 2005 is when we received the federal earmark to acquire the rail yard project or property. And at the time, that dollar amount was an estimate. In January of 13, which was kind of a long time between the fall of 05 and January of 13, we were finally able to sign a memorandum of understanding with Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, outlining general terms to acquire the rail yard property. In July of 15, the rail yard property was rezoned by the City Council to become part of our downtown PUD. In August of 15, a purchase agreement was signed between the railroad and the city to purchase approximately 10.25 acres of property, 1 acre of right-of-way and miscellaneous property, including trackage in a freight building, which was ultimately removed. November of 15, we closed on the purchase of the rail yard, and that also started a 2-year lease to the railroad to occupy that property while they completed construction of their new infrastructure and modified their operations. And then in August of 16, the city acquired the services of RDG Consultants out of Omaha to put together a concept redevelopment plan for the 10 acres of railroad, and we held a series of public meetings seeking comment on concepts for the rail yard property. And we had a lot of interested parties, a lot of interested people that were kind of focusing in on what they would like to see and what they thought was good for the future of downtown. In November, RDG prepared that redevelopment concept. And then in January of 17 is when the city posted an RFQ to select interested developers to submit their qualifications. And that began the formal process of trying to find out, we've got this property, we've got a concept plan, okay, now who's interested in actually looking at development? This is the concept plan that RDG put together, showing some ideas of the entire 10 acres of rail yard property. And that also went out with the RFQs. Based on our response in April of 2017, developers that met the minimum requirements for the RFP were notified and asked to submit proposals for development of the rail yard. I'm going to go back one. The RFQ, we received 6 responses to the RFQ. And of those, the steering committee that we were working with, the review committee, felt that 5 of those met the minimum qualifications, and then were asked to actually submit development proposals. And of those 5, we actually received 4 development proposals. And so that's what we did back in April, is we reached out for more formal proposals. And then as a result of that, the proposal that was submitted by the one that we're going to be considering today seemed to be the best fit to start with, because it was adjacent to 8th Street, where we had seen a number of redevelopment projects already. The timing was right in terms of the first phase to begin working on that project. And as a result of that, that triggered in July of 2017 that we would begin negotiating with the Billions on their proposal and a development agreement. And then in October of last year, we did an appraisal as part of our negotiations with Black Iron Rail Yard. And in November, we took full possession of the property after the expiration of that 2-year lease. And now we are here today to present to you the results of about a year's effort of review and negotiation on the Black Iron Rail Yard proposal. So with that, unless you have questions for part 1, we'll turn this over to, I think, Jim. Who's going to start this off? Jim Witterick is going to be approaching the bench, so we'll turn it over to Jim. I guess. You know how to work that?
Welcome, Jim.
Yep, that forward.
Yep.
All right. Jim Witterick with Woods, Fuller, Schultz & Smith, a law firm here in Sioux Falls, and I represent Black Iron Rail Yard, LLC. The negotiations for this project began in earnest back in January of this year, and we've probably gone through about 20 different drafts of the development agreement and the offer to purchase. At the same time that the negotiations were going forward, what's important to note that one of the reasons it took as long as it did to get to this stage and to this place is that the offer to purchase is written without any contingencies. So there's no contingencies that you would typically find in terms of financing, due diligence, environmental, status of title, et cetera. That all had to be done at the same time that the negotiations were going forward, and that was all successfully completed and to a point where the purchaser became comfortable with the project at this point. So that's just a little bit of background as to what's been happening over the last several months. The vision for the East Bank is a community center, in that the combination of the phase 1 of this project, along with the investment that our clients have already made in 8th and Railroad, in the Frank Transfer Building, and in the Crane Building, both of which are on the other side of 8th Street, will create an open green area and gathering place for many events that are envisioned to come forward, and some of those events are already occurring on the west side of 8th and Railroad, that you may be familiar with some of those that occur during the summer on First Fridays, et cetera. So that's the vision. Our clients believe that there is a market demand. This is a mixed-use project. The mixed-use part of this project includes retail on the first floor, office then as you go up, and then a combination of apartments and condos on phase 1, all within a 6-story building that will include 100,000 square feet. And then there are a number of additional, just as an overview, there's a number of additional items that are included in phase 1. It includes the amenities that I talked about in the courtyard community center. It includes underground parking. It includes the construction of a street at the developer's cost on the east side of the property. Also construction of a bike trail that once it is constructed by the developer will be turned over to the city for future maintenance at that point. So the entire area is being designed together at this point. Justin, just go ahead. The green space that I talked about is identified in the middle. There are some glass structures and a pool that's included as an amenity. On the east side, Dustin, if you could point out the bike trail and then the street that I had talked about. Now, on the left side of your screen is really the phase. Well, I should also mention that under that entire courtyard is where the parking is located for phase 1. As you go north toward 8th Street, the level of the soil decreases before you hit bedrock. So all of the parking is generally pulled to the south of the building, and it's not anticipated that there would be any construction that would go under this first phase building. Phase 2 to the left are 2 buildings connected with an atrium. Those are not as well defined at this point. They are intended to be mixed use. The actual timing of that part of the project is much further out, simply because the developer, Black Iron Rail Yard, does not know what the commercial demand will be for the various uses as you go forward. We all hear in the press that things are going to slow down in the next couple of years nationally. What that means in Sioux Falls, we're not sure. It's our hope that Sioux Falls' economy continues to be strong, that we're able to continue with phase 2 following, shortly after the completion of phase 1. So it's a mixed-use 2-phase project, and has a lot of community amenities. The other thing that I would point out is that as part of the development agreement, if you look at the building toward the top of your screen, that's 8th and Railroad, and there will be an easement on the south side of 8th and Railroad that will connect with this developer's street on the east side of phase 1 and phase 2. So Dustin, kind of pull through just to the north of, there you go, pull through into that parking lot, and then it'll connect over to that street. So we've already negotiated the terms of that easement. It's attached to the development agreement as an exhibit. This is a better look of phase 1. I should really have Steve come up and talk a little bit about the construction. We have Steve Jastrom here from Architecture Incorporated, who has done all of the design work to date.
Sure. Probably use your mouse in a second. Again, I'm Steve Jastrom with Architecture Incorporated, and I hope I can answer any design or material questions you may have on the project. As Jim was mentioning, this is the first phase building. 8th Street is right there. What's really nice with the vision that David and Erica Billion have presented is the open plaza, commercial, multi-use buildings, but they want to do it right. They want to do a very sustainable building. They want to build it with steel and concrete that's going to last a long time. And so all the materials that we're proposing here fit into that category of very durable long-term use. The other thing that was very refreshing to see, and they requested that we try to design to, is the historical character of the East Bank. It has a very unique historical character, but interjects some new contemporary elements and shapes and blend the two together. And that was a challenge they gave us, and I think that we kind of do that. Let's see, the next one here. They also, as part of the plaza area, there's fountains and fire pits and everything that'll make this a real urban, fun space to be, especially if you're working, you'll probably want to be outside, frankly. Here's another area of the Phase 2 building. Why don't we go to the video here? Dustin, thank you. And as long as the mouse works up here, I can stop it, and I'll kind of explain a few things as we go along. Let me get my mouse set here. On the wood will work better? Okay. Real quickly, this is a view similar to what we started with here. 8th Street is on the right. The other thing I want to mention, that was when we did the big plaza area, it was very obvious to us and everyone, a real focal point is the railroad, it's the rail yard. Here's the Burlington Northern terminal building. So the whole plaza and everything has been designed to focus on that as a background, and to hopefully that building will be maintained there. It's not on our building site area, but we feel it's a very important icon for the downtown. And again, Phase 1 is to the right. The plaza is part of Phase 1, and then this is the Phase 2 building. Now the building construction, what you see here, a lot of this is masonry, and some of this will be quartzite, our local stone. I guess some people could ask, you'll see some black elements here, and when you get it to the front, well, black iron building, they're proposing there's steel. And so there's going to be a nice combination of exterior steel. Most of the Phase 2, we see the upper levels will be more residential development of some kind. And as Jim mentioned, that will be determined as market demands in the future. Then an existing building that Dave and Erica Billion own is right here. They're talking about refurbishing that. The other interesting and fun part of the project is the art and sculptures, and they'd like to redo and have sculptures, and not only inside, but the whole plaza area is to be focused on use of exterior sculptures. So this plaza should be a very fun place to go. As Jim mentioned earlier, there's surface parking, of course, and some of this will be built now, but there's going to be underground parking under all of this as well, so that we can accommodate the parking needs of everybody for Phase 1, and some of it even toward Phase 2. Again, the green is obviously grass, and the pavement area, it should be a great place for concerts. You can set up things here in the front. All sorts of events can occur here. The other thing we saw potential is if this is a event, is open plaza, it'd be really nice to have a third level restaurant that really had a great view of everything. It can have a view of the Burlington Northern Terminal building, but here and even toward the downtown. So would like to see if we can have a nice restaurant on third level. The new building here, or the first phase building is going to take on a little more character of the existing 8th and Railroad. The other part of the request from the city was we create a walkway, a boulevard that connects from the north, and then you can continue on to the south, and this is where we're walking here. There'll be retail shops to the left, outdoor seating, and all the retail shops that'll occur on the first floor space, with obviously office on second. But again, this is meant as a pedestrian people space in the evening. And here's like an example of some of the outdoor sculptures we see happening. Erica and David Billion envision they'd like some glass cubes where we have some stairway and even some underground retail underneath that. So these would be buildings you walk in to a stair that could go into more retail. Again, something very unique and very different. Obviously the contemporary blend to the site. And there's also going to be like a little water features. Again, Dave and Erica would love to have places where kids can come and the whole family and the kids can play in the water, which is kind of fun. Phase 2 building, we envision to look something like this. Again, a retail on first and potential office on second and third. And again, sculptures we see happening here is a very fun urban space to want to be in. And here's the restaurant up above. An overall site plan, I'd like to real quickly just kind of summarize again what's in phase 1 and what's in phase 2. Oop. Maybe I better go back just a second here and pause it here. As you look at this drawing here, 8th Street is to your left over here. And this is the phase 1 building because the existing 8th and Railroad is right here. So phase 1 is going to be the new parking in between, the new phase 1 building, the new plaza, the development of those glass cubicles and sculptures we talked about and retail there. The phase 1 also includes the private road and the bike path that runs along the east edge of the property. So development will stop pretty much along here for phase 1, even though there'll be some parking. And as Jim mentioned, the road of the parking that comes up to the existing road currently over here by CNA building, you'll be able to drive east through here on a temporary road and connect up onto this private road. This road will go away in the future whenever phase 2 is built, and then our road connection is further to the south. The actual viaduct, which I should have mentioned earlier, the 10th Street viaduct is right here, up above, of course, upper level. So this phase 2 project is still a ways away from the viaduct, but it's next to the viaduct. And then there's existing parking currently south of the viaduct, which is over here. And of course, the Sioux River is just off to the right. Any other questions on maybe some site items or issues that maybe some explaining?
We will, thank you for your presentation on that. We'll probably just continue and then we'll do questions all at the end.
Very
so
good.
Stay tuned.
As Dustin's getting ready to reach the conclusion here, I just wanted to go back and touch. We have a steering committee that has been working on this for quite some time. Josh Peterson with engineering is here. From attorneys Diane Best and Danny Brown. And then our outside legal consultant, Greg Greenfield. And then Dustin, who's going to be coming up now, has been a key player in working through this process. And so that's why we're really glad that he's the one presenting to you now about the next steps and the items that will be coming to you, the council, for consideration.
Good afternoon, Council. Dustin with the Planning and Development Services Department. Just one other slide I was going to do for Steve here was just kind of the phase 1 construction schedule, a part of their development. The underground parking would start in the fall of 2018, phase 1 development starting in the spring of 19, and then completion of the phase 1 in fall of 2020. And we'll get into a little bit more of what the agreement states those timelines should be as well as I go through some of the slides here for the offer to purchase and the development agreement. So first, let's hit on the offer to purchase agreement. As Mike had stated in his timeline during October of 2017, when we started the negotiations process with Black Iron Rail Yard LLC, we did receive an appraisal for the property that we would be working with them on their development proposal. And just to kind of highlight, I'm going to flip back and forth here. The red area is all of the property south of 8th Street that was part of the rail yard purchase and in which we would be selling to Black Iron LLC. There was a caveat there, though, that the city will be retaining a portion of this property as part of the bike trail and that private roadway that'll go through there. So again, just to kind of summarize what the appraisal stated that the entire property that you see highlighted there in red was 211,000 square feet, and it was appraised at $3,165,000. As part of those negotiations, again, as we worked through those with the Billions, it was decided that the city would retain a portion of this property, thus reducing the amount of square footage in which we would be selling them for the redevelopment of the site. And so the city ultimately would be retaining about 34,000 square feet, which leads to what is actually in the offer to purchase. So the developer would be purchasing 176,000 square feet. Again, following the same per square foot basis that was in the appraisal, that equates out to the $2.6 million that you see for the total land sale amount for this property. One other note, the reason within the offer to purchase, and you see up on the screen that the parcels are identified separately there, as well as for parcel A, there is a little bit less per square foot value for that property. When we look at the site and we look at this image again, when you look at parcel A, it's a very odd shape, irregular shape for development with that triangle pie shape, as well as there's a number of easements and encumbrances on the property that ultimately resulted in the property being valued a little bit less. And so again, the appraisal we originally received was for $3.1 million, but by reducing the square footage in which ultimately is being sold as part of this, we kept those square footage valuations and brought them to the new amount of property that would be sold to the Billions, ultimately ending again in the $2.6 million for the sale of the property. Moving on to the development agreement, within the one of the note that I would state with the development agreement is all the terms of the development agreement are incorporated into the offer to purchase. And so bringing these forward to the council, they will all be brought as one ordinance because the development agreement and the purchase agreement all interrelate with each other via those conditions. So within the development agreement, there was a number of what were called site preparations that needed to be made by both the developer and the city to make this site prepared for the development. And for the presentations, for this presentation, I've separated them out between the developer's responsibilities and the city's. First, starting with the developer's responsibility, there is a replat that is associated with this, obviously with the city retaining a portion of this property. And as a result, we've made the developer responsible for the replatting of those parcels. As discussed earlier in the presentation, the developer will also be responsible for building the bike path that will run along the eastern edge of this property. Ultimately, the city will take over the maintenance and ownership of that on the next slide. There's a little bit of a misstatement here on the third bullet point there, but ultimately the developer and the city will enter into a private roadway easement, and that roadway easement again is on that eastern edge of the property that the city would be retaining. And ultimately the developer will build, own, and maintain the roadway that'll be built in that roadway easement. As for the city's responsibilities in the development agreement, there was some relocation of utilities that needed to happen to make this site developable. The first being a Sprint fiber optic line. This line actually runs almost the whole length of the full rail yard redevelopment area, and so it goes through not just the parcels that we're looking at selling to Black Iron LLC, but the other rail yard redevelopment area. And right now we are working with Sprint to get a plan in place and get that project completed yet this summer. The CenturyLink utilities that are also included in that first bullet point, if you've been by the area, you've noticed that the tracks were removed and 8th Street is now has some new asphalt and blacktop on there. When we went through and did that work related to the making the improvements to the roadway there to accommodate smoother traffic there, we went ahead and removed and relocated the CenturyLink utilities that were just south of the property line along 8th Street back into the 8th Street right-of-way. And so those have been completed, or the CenturyLink has been relocated to date. Removal and disposal of approximately the top 6 inches of topsoil along with the railroad tracks. This was a condition of the agreements that we had with the federal highway. And so this is, again, something that's been completed to prepare the site for development and sale. But this was one of the conditions of the federal highway agreements that we had for purchasing the property. Build, own, and maintain a fence on the city's property. So this is referring to the eastern edge of the property, again, separating the Burlington Northern, the existing Burlington Northern land and what the city currently owns and would be selling to Black Iron. This would run the length of, obviously, the stretch between all of the Burlington Northern land and what the city has purchased. This was a requirement of the Burlington Northern Agreement, and there is a plan to work on getting that bid out and having that completed yet in the fall of this year. Installation, so build, own, and installation of the historical marker. So another part of the agreements with the federal highway is along with SHPO, we were required to install a historical marker representing the nature of the rail yard area. And we have, a part of the development agreement, we have agreed to a location of where that historic easement would be. In that triangle area that we would be selling along 8th Street to the Billions, that would be where we would enter into a historic marker easement with the Billions after they purchased the property, and then ultimately a historic marker would be placed there along 8th Street going forward. And so there's still some details to work out with that, but ultimately the development agreement already outlines the easement that would be in place, and then thus it would just be the city finalizing the design of that marker and getting that placed on the site. And then own, maintain, and repair the bike path once the developer built. Again, once the developer has built the bike path as shown in the project proposal, the city would take over ownership and maintenance. And again, that would be located on city property that we would be retaining as part of this project. So just to kind of go through some of the phase 1 requirements, Steve and Jim did a good job of summarizing what the actual project is, but what I wanted to highlight were just some of the requirements located within the development agreement. So phase 1 development, the developer shall commence construction by June of 2019, so next year, and complete the phase 1 improvements by December 31st of 2020. One of the things that we have written into the agreement, we've written in some of in some of the other recent agreements that we've done with the sale of land downtown, is that if the developer does not adhere to the conditions of those phase 1 requirements as outlined in the agreement, the city would have an option to repurchase all or a portion of the property back from them. So again, this is a protection for the city in case things don't go as planned in the agreement. Just to kind of outline what the minimum requirements are for the phase 1 development, a minimum of 6-story is that building along 8th Street that Steve discussed, with a minimum of 100,000 square feet and 30,000 square feet being dedicated to commercial space. We've already hit on the developer will complete the private roadway as well as the bike path on the city's property, as well as the completion of those courtyard improvements that were described, and then the underground parking would also be as part of phase 1 under those courtyard improvements. So again, I bring this up just to show you again what we're talking about with phase 1. And phase 1 would be this is 8th Street, it would be this building here, and it would be those courtyard improvements along with the roadway, the bike path, and the underground parking that are associated underneath the courtyard there. Phase 2 development, Jim did a good job discussing this and why the completion date is extended out. So as we work through the negotiations on this project, as well as working with the developer on how this proposal could come to fruition, one of the things that we talked about is the necessity to extend the time frame for the phase 2 development. and ultimately taking time to evaluate the market conditions, as the first phase of this project is to be completed in 2020. That's 2 years from now, and things could be different. And so giving them the opportunity to look at the market conditions, look at what other development has happened downtown and what uses are needed at that time will ultimately extend the time frame for development. And then still adding on that you would still need to go through design and a construction phase for this. So as we worked through this process and we talked about what the phase 2 requirement should be, we looked at kind of a typical design build phase of what we're doing with phase 1, and then really gave some opportunity and expansion to that, and ultimately ended on 2030 as being that time frame to complete the phase 2 requirements. Also, there's a little bit of protection in this agreement as well related to the phase 2 improvements. So if the developer meets those phase 1 commitments and we don't have to rebuy back the property, what we did is we also put commitments on the developer that they would commit to completing phase 2. And ultimately, if those commitments aren't made, then the developer has agreed to pay some liquidated damages that are identified in the development agreement, and ultimately result in 15% of the purchase price for the phase 2 is what was agreed upon for those liquidated damages. What we wanted to do is also kind of just with this slide outline some of the economic benefits associated with this agreement. The purchase price being $2,614,795 is obviously a direct benefit to the city. Those funds are earmarked because we purchased this land with federal highway dollars. Any of the land that we sell is earmarked for a future highway eligible project. So these dollars have been programmed into the CIP for future highway projects going forward. Obviously, the phase 1 development is estimated at a $32 million cost to the developer. That will result in increased property tax revenue that will benefit all the city, the county, and the school districts going forward. And then an increase in sales tax revenue from the additional retail establishments that will be a part of the phase 1 improvement. Phase 2 is estimated to be anywhere between the $40 and $50 million range. Again, there's multiple buildings associated with phase 2, and still needing to figure out what those look like is why there's a range up there for that development. But again, an increase in property tax revenue will definitely be a part of those improvements. And then at this time, no other city assistance has been requested that requires city council approval. So there's no financial incentives being requested that would have to come to council for approval on this project. One last thing with the agreement is requirements, again, from the Federal Highway Administration as part of this project and the purchase of the rail yard, the whole rail yard area. And what that is a Sioux Falls Downtown Environmental Overlay District. So this is attached to the development agreement and will be an exhibit of the development agreement, but we also need to approve this overlay district as we go through this process. And so we would just be bringing these concurrently, both the development, the offer to purchase, and then the environmental overlay will all be brought concurrently to the city council. Again, this is a Federal Highway Administration requirement, and what it does is it provides for ongoing environmental controls for the area and any future health concerns that would be a result of disturbing the area during development. It provides for a coordinated review between the city and the state Department of Environmental and Natural Resources. It requires that an environmental engineer must complete a detailed environmental assessment before any development can occur, and that if any cleanup is required by the DENR, it must be undertaken before the development can actually happen. And then one other part of that is if there are any substances that are found but are clean enough that the DNR does not require cleanup at this time, at any time the use of that property changes or future redevelopment happens, they would need to do another review of the property before the city would issue any construction permits. So again, this is a requirement of the Federal Highway that will be attached as part of the development agreement, but is also needed for council approval to cover the entire property that the city originally purchased from Burlington Northern Santa Fe as part of the rail yard redevelopment fund. So next steps coming forward, 2 items will be brought to City Council: an ordinance approving the surplus of the city-owned property, the offer to purchase, and the development agreement. Those will all be incorporated into one ordinance. The second being the ordinance approving the Sioux Falls Downtown Environmental Overlay District, which I just went through. So to kind of give you a time frame of what that will look like, informational meeting today on July 17th. We want to give some time to review and ask questions as part of this presentation, and also before these agreements come before City Council. So we've extended the first reading would be on August 7th. Second readings, we'd have a 2-week period in between there where we would be able to answer questions again, with the second reading coming on August 21st. Ultimately, if we receive approvals on both of those dates, then the effective date of the agreements would be September 14th, and we would ultimately close on the property before August or October 1st of this year. So again, there's a lot of information here. Ultimately, our plan is wanting to lay out this time frame, be able to get you guys the agreements ahead of time so that you have time to review them, because they are lengthy agreements, and then be able to answer questions and be ready for those August dates as we have set forth in the slide above. So again, in closing, I think that there's been a lot of effort and work on this project from 2005 to date. There's been a lot of effort and work over the last 10 to 12 months with Black Iron LLC and their commitment to bringing this project forward to the city of Sioux Falls. And ultimately, we will receive a great project for the city of Sioux Falls in the heart of our city downtown. So with that, I will open it up for questions. There's a number of us here from city staff as well as the development team that could answer any of those.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone who presented. Turning it over to the council. Questions, Councilor Neitzert?
Thank you. The first thing I want to do is I want to recognize Dave and Erica Billion for the investment in the community. I did sit on the RFP, so I've had to keep quiet for over a year, and it's been tough. When we looked at this particularly, and I think Davis made mention of this, really a lot of this vision was Erica's vision, and it's really fantastic. There was, the kind of the homage to the existing development and restoring kind of that historical character around there, having all of that green space, the common space for the community, the mixed uses. It really kind of hit on everything that we asked for in the RFP. So we were really impressed by it, and we wanted them to push also when it came to the density, and they did that. They went up 6 stories here. So with that, I just have a couple of questions. The overlay district, is that going to be a zoning district? I mean, I think we have one right now, which is the airport overlay. Who controls the?
Yeah, ultimately the overlay district would be over the rail yard area, and as any project would come forth in that area would be flagged by the building services and zoning that we would need to have that environmental assessment done as part of that project.
Okay, so that's going to be a new overlay district in the zoning ordinance. I mean, when you say overlay district, I'm just wondering where that lives, or if that's has nothing to do with zoning and it's a...
It's a separate ordinance from the zoning ordinance, but it will be a supplement to the zoning ordinance. We currently have a similar overlay for the North Phillips area, for the uptown area.
Okay.
So we have a precedence that we've done this before.
Okay. For the funds that we get from the sale of the property has to be used for federal highway projects. Would quiet zones that we're looking at studying and doing in the coming years, would that qualify as, could we expend funds for quiet zones?
Hello, Josh Peterson with City Engineering. We've checked on that with DOT and Federal Highway. Quiet zones specifically do not qualify under the requirements they have. They want us to spend that money on qualifying street projects, basically our arterial street system. So we've looked to evaluate which upcoming projects we have that follow the requirements that would generally be needed with a federal type funded project. So the quiet zones aren't funded through that. We do have a in the 2019 program, there is some money in there to start the study for quiet zones in the downtown area.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, and I saw that in the 2019 CIP, and that has been brought up, and I wanted people to know that we are working on quiet zones. It takes time, and it's not the cheapest thing to do it at each intersection, but we'd like to do it through downtown.
Yep,
So.
it is definitely something we're looking at. We've identified the downtown corridor as a kicking off point for that, which may grow into citywide as we go through the process. But we wanted to start with 6th Street, 8th Street, and Weber Avenue downtown as kind of a phase one. So we evaluating that first, and then determining the capital projects that'll be needed, putting a budget together, and then we'll get that implemented into the capital program. Okay.
And last question, I assume, are there going to be certain deed restrictions put on this land that are going to run with the land forever? And is that, and I'm not sure exactly what it would be, like restrictions on what they could do with the property, things like that. There was a lot of that, I think, in the parking ramp proposal as an example.
Yeah, ultimately, the conditions of the development agreement will run with the property until they expire with that 2030 timeline. So our repurchase option would run with the property, after we sell it, as well as the other conditions that extend out through the 2030. But ultimately, those would come off at that time.
They extinguish essentially once they've completed the entire vision.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. My questions involve, it goes back to the offer to purchase, and it involves the configuration of the parcels and the determination of the size and shape of the parcels. Can you tell me who ultimately made that decision prior to this even going forward? And I'm referring to parcels A, B, and C.
Ultimately, those are the rail yard tracks that we purchased from Burlington Northern Santa Fe. So these are the parcels that we purchased from them. So there hasn't been any reconfiguration of those. Those are how those were platted at the time we purchased it from Burlington Northern. So they were some of the jogs out that you see here, like on the eastern side, was obviously dictated by some of the needs that they still had for their property along that eastern edge, and so that's ultimately the result of some of the weird characteristics I think you see with the properties.
Okay, so that's a result of, that's how we purchased it.
Yeah.
And thus, that's how we're selling it.
Yeah. There would be obviously, there's going to be a linear strip along this eastern edge that the city's going to retain, and then the remainder of that is what we are selling to Black Iron.
Okay, thank you. And then my question is, parcel A being valued at $2 a square foot less than parcels B and C. I can see that if parcel A were sold separately to a separate developer, but when parcel A is combined with parcel B, does that not
ultimately, when we did
value to equal B? And because I could say the same about C, it's sticking out there all by itself on the other side of the bridge. Mm-hmm. And yet it's valued at $15 a square foot versus $13. Could you explain how that was arrived at?
Ultimately, when we requested the appraisal to be done, the development at the time didn't necessarily require the parcel A. And so we thought about that needing to be appraised as a separate parcel because at the time, and if you look at the Billions proposal, there isn't any structure other than some of the plaza improvements that are associated with parcel A. So when we did do the appraisal, it was appraised separately. Ultimately, there's other encumbrances, again, that are on that with a driveway easement and other easements that are located on that property that just resulted in a reason to look at that property separately. So when the appraisal was done, it was done individually to the other parcels of the land. But ultimately, that's the reason for the result of a little bit less square
Otherwise,
footage
it could have
value.
sat there unsold and not developed.
Yep. And so when we worked through the negotiation processes with the Billions, it was decided that they would take that property from us as well. And ultimately, we added that to the purchase agreement, and then they incorporated extended their design out into that area to incorporate some of the plaza area or the pedestrian areas that you see along there. That'll also be the area where we'll have to retain an easement from them to incorporate our historic marker. And so there's obviously even additional encumbrances that we'll be putting on the property when we sign the development agreement.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, and my congratulations to everybody involved, because this is a extremely complex project to put together. So to the Billions and to everybody else who's been involved in this, thank you.
Councilor Staley, I know you mentioned you had a question.
As long as you're up there, Dustin. Historical marker, is that going to look like the one does out by City Hall? Is that we're talking about, like with a green background?
The historical marker that's being proposed would include a historical information about the railroad development in Sioux Falls and all the old depot buildings that we used to have. And we're looking at a fairly large, about a 4x8 poster of 2 sides that would be installed in the actual structure that kind of replicates an old depot building. That would be a kind of at a pedestrian scale that people could walk by or ride by and learn more about the history of the railroads.
Okay, so not like the traditional historical markers we see.
Right, this is more of a custom designed. It's
Okay.
going to look really nice.
Okay, good. So I've got a few questions. First of all, swimming pool, or are we talking swimming? No, I thought they were saying that people could swim in that area, a place where kids could come down and splash around. Did I hear you say that?
Yeah, again, Steve Jastrom with Architecture Incorporated. Yeah, like the picture you see here, that pool is probably like 4 inches thick. It's just a fountain. There's no swimming pools. They desire to have a couple areas where kids can walk by, where water shoots out of the ground on your feet, but there's no real standing water except for just a very minimal area like underneath these fountains.
Okay, because I thought I heard you say they could splash around in there.
Well, the kids can splash and, yeah, I mean.
But not get in, they're not going to be getting in and wading around.
It's at the most for like 3, maybe it's only 3 inches deep, the water. And then there's an area where we had showing, they'd like the spot, similar to, there's a very similar area downtown Rapid City where kids can walk by and the water shoots up on you.
Okay,
it's
I
just
wasn't sure how deep that was.
Yeah,
Thank
it's not
you.
a pool. If I used the word pool, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm not sure you said, but I thought I heard you say splash around, so I kind of was thinking pool. Now, another question, how far is this building going to be from the actual railroad tracks?
I don't know if you want to go to the site plan, Dustin. I don't have a distance for you in feet, but it's quite a ways away because as you look at this drawing, our new buildings are here. This is the new street and walkway. Then there's the Burlington Northern Terminal, and then as I recall, the tracks are just right here. I mean, they're a ways away from the new property line, but I don't know exactly how far, unless anybody else does.
So until the quiet zone thing is implemented, you're still going to have the trains are still going to be blowing the whistle as they come through. So that, okay. And I'm assuming they vetted that out to say people aren't going to mind living right next to that. Right, that you wouldn't put a condominium.
Yeah, I think
in there.
David and Eric, Billion, could address it better because as they own and manage the 8th and Railroad currently, I know they're aware of it. So.
I can address that. David Billion, part of Black Iron LLC. The property that's on the north side of 8th Street known as the Frank Building and the Crane Building. My wife has managed for a number of years, and there has been excellent occupancy. It's primarily apartment. There's some main floor retail, and then all of the floors above the main floor are occupied by residents. And there's been office space in 8th and Railroad she's been managing that for an owner of that for over 14 years. And the rail yard has never been really a complaint from a standpoint of noise. It's I'll tell you, the jets flying over are much louder than the railroads going by, but it's part of living in a downtown area, you know, in more of an urban area. But that has not been a distraction or has not caused any occupancy issues with
Excellent, good.
with the site.
Yeah, and it's, you're
But
invested.
I do want to say thank you to Greg for asking the question with regard to can the funds be utilized for a private or a quiet zone? And the city is continuing to evaluate what it takes to put a quiet zone on 6th Street, 8th Street, and Weber, it sounds like. So hopefully they can pursue that and be successful with that.
Thank you. And I have a few more questions. Just to, as I'm explaining this to citizens, and I know this is going back to 2005, let's talk, Mike Cooper, if you could come up. I just wanted to get some clarification, because I know this was, we were talking about this money and $40 million earmark, and how much of that did we actually utilize?
27?
Because I thought it was kind of starting to diminish. We were at a point where we were going to lose it if we didn't do something.
We did not use the total amount, but I'm going to have Josh give you that number, and then I'll come back and answer, I think, your follow-up question.
Sure. We'll talk just kind of some round numbers. The original earmark was for $40 million. Federal Highway generally does not allocate the total earmark to a recipient. They will reserve some of those funds. That's due to concerns about how their revenues are coming in. Sometimes they reallocate it to something like Hurricane Katrina, something like that. So we got around $36 million was about the total that was eligible for our project. Throughout this project, we're going to spend about $30 to $31 million of the earmark total on the rail yard redevelopment. And the last $5 to $5.5 million that was there through the last highway fund, or this highway bill that the feds put together, there was an opportunity for us to close out that and receive that money from the state to allocate to another project. So that $5.5 million, we actually received that, so we're getting the full $37 million. But we had to allocate that to a eligible street project, and that went to the 85th Street project this year east of Louise, or west of Louise.
So then how much money did we put in, or maybe that came out of the 31 million when we're talking about those improvements that we did?
The 31 million, that all went to purchasing the yard, hiring consultants to do engineering and environmental work, appraisals, things like that, the relocation of the private utilities.
So we didn't put any other city funds into this thing?
We did early on. There were some ineligible funds through the environmental process where we had to allocate some local funds.
How much was that?
I don't have an exact dollar figure. I believe we were around $300,000.
Okay. And then, so we got the 2.6 million, and that is, of course, we're going to get property tax money out of this, but 2.6 is it's all done. They bought the land, and we're not going to be reaping any more money out of that $37 million purchase. Is that?
Well, again, this is only for the first 4 acres. There's another 6 acres of land that we still own that we would be able to sell after this.
When would that be? 2030, or I mean, when are you?
We don't have a
planning
time frame established yet, but all the land north of 8th Street we still own, and we could still pursue other redevelopment projects.
So part of the 37 million was that bigger.
I think the other thing that's important for people to understand is that when we reached an agreement to purchase the 10 acres from Burlington Northern, that was based on the value of land as well as the financial impact to their operations. And so the value of the land as part of that negotiation is consistent with what we're selling the land for now. That $15, that $13 to $15 is still consistent with what was determined to be the value of the land when we acquired it. That's what maybe is hard for people to equate. Well, if we spent 30-some million and now we're only getting 2.6, why is that a good deal for the city? Well, first of all, we're talking about land versus land, and then we're only talking at this point about 4 of the 10 acres that we're selling. I hope that helps clarify.
No, I understand what you're saying. And then, I'm clear that there's no TIFs being asked for, so that's, this whole thing is never going to be coming to that.
Yeah, at this time, there's no other city assistance that we're proposing to include.
And the last thing I wanted to ask was, so we've got this first phase happening, and then we're giving you a 10-year window. Let's say that some other business is interested. Are they going to approach the Billions and say, we want to partner, we want to come in here and put this in, or will you be actively out there looking for people to kind of piggyback on your investment in that 10-year period?
I'm not sure. 10 years is a lot of time. What we see and what my wife has been down in that neighborhood for over 14 years. She's been owner of 8th and Railroad for the 14 years. And it was a fairly vacant warehouse when she ended up taking over. And she has redeveloped, repurposed a lot of the space. And there continues to be people that want to come into the space. There are people that continue to look for open apartments, office space, and what have you. One thing that this site does allow is ample parking. And for an urban area to have parking is a big boon for having kind of public opportunities. The Downtown Sioux Falls organization has been very good over the past number of years. You know, the fundraisers that are done for raising money for the community at large and the First Fridays events have continued to grow, continued to be, I think, the #1 funding for downtown Sioux Falls. So as we look into the future, you know, we want to obviously develop this particular property. In the event that, say, there was a corporate office that wanted to come to Sioux Falls, they identified this as a potential place to be in a downtown area. If we could meet the needs and come to an agreement with them, that's hard to say what the future is. I mean, we'll certainly be open to listening to what, you know, development is. But one thing we do want to, and my wife in particular being an artist, she wants to keep the character of that area very similar to what is being proposed for Phase 2. So if someone wanted to come in and do something that's quite contrary to or quite similar to what is being proposed to Phase 2, if they wanted a stick-built apartment building, that would not happen. So, you know, it's going to be a higher quality, more long-term materials used for, you know, something to be enjoyed for the next 100 years or better. So.
But what if he decides he wants to sell that property? Would you, let's just say you say, well, we got a buyer, we're going to sell it to someone else to develop it. Can he do that in that 10-year period? Is that?
Jim Wiederick again. There is a provision within the offer to purchase and will be included in the deed as a restriction that the property may not be sold, transferred, or assigned without the city's consent until both Phase 1 and Phase 2 are completed.
Really? So until 20, and or if it doesn't happen by 2030, then this liquidation thing, how does that work? I mean, we buy it back?
It would be a cash payment back to the city.
Of the 15, you said something about less 15%?
It would be 15% of the value of the Phase 2 portion of the property.
We would buy it back for that.
You would not buy it back. It would be a cash payment. And the reason it's different on Phase 2 than Phase 1 is that it would interfere with financing. You wouldn't be able to get financing with a continuing option to repurchase in order to develop Phase 2. So instead of having a repurchase right What the city has is liquidated damages in the form of a cash payment.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Counselor Selberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Thanks for everybody's efforts here, and especially to the Billions for this investment. I mean, wow, amazing. I just have a couple quick questions. One thing that comes to mind, just when you talk about like the city's responsibilities for the site preparations, what kind of cost is there on the, the items we're looking at there, like the Sprint fiber optic line and utilities, removing of the topsoil, fence, those type of things? Any estimates?
And I don't have it, my notes broken down to that level of detail, but that's coming out of those earmark funds. All of that 31 million I was explaining to earlier, all of that is part of the costs that we're or the funding we have to prepare the site for redevelopment.
Okay, makes sense. And then this last other question might tie into one that was just asked, but just, when you look at things like this, and not to put a cloud on any of this, I'm sure it'll be a smashing success. I know it will be, but, when you're looking at big projects, and sometimes you look at what is the risk and what's worst case scenario, and then you talk about if the development, the developer does not adhere to phase 1 commitments and the repurchasing type of thing. What again are the breakdowns on, there's certain deadlines that come along, and if things aren't moving up to speed, then warnings are given, and then again, and I'm not saying it'll happen, just kind of looking on the dark side of this a little bit, just going, what happens in these situations? Does it go back to this 15% of value now if something were to come up like that and the city's getting it back?
So ultimately, as Jim discussed, it's different for phase 1 and phase 2. For the phase 1 improvements, they're supposed to start those by June 1st of 2019. So if for some reason they haven't started yet, we have then an opportunity to repurchase the property. And in the agreement, there's a notification process, and I don't know the exact timelines, but I believe that the city has to send notice to them of the repurchase, and there's a response that has to happen as part of that. Now, the city doesn't ultimately have to enter into the repurchase agreement. We don't have to. So if, let's say they were going to start on June 2nd instead of June 1st, we don't have to repurchase the property. We have the option to repurchase. Ultimately, if we were to, again, the second part of phase 1 is that the completion by December 31st of 2020. Again, if they were to complete that by January 1 or even March of 2021, we would be working with them obviously as it got close to those timeframes to discuss those. But we have the option to repurchase. We don't automatically have to repurchase it. The other thing we wrote in there, and again, if this was worst case scenario, and let's say they were to start phase 1 and they were to build a shell of a building, with that repurchase, we don't have to repurchase the entire property. What we could do is we could repurchase just the phase 2 portion of the property because there wouldn't be improvements on that. And again, that would be part of the discussion if something like this were to happen, but there obviously is a notification process if we were to enter into the repurchase phase. As for the phase 2 requirements, again, our repurchase option is only for the phase 1 time frame, and so that would be, I believe there's an actual date established in there by June of 2021, I believe, is when we would have to issue. It's our final right for the repurchase of any of the property. And then we go into the phase 2. And ultimately, if there's any hiccups with phase 2, whether that be they don't meet the 2030 timeline, they decide to not meet the minimum requirements of building size and do something smaller, we have the right to get the liquidated damages that were established in the agreement. And the liquidated damages were 15% of the cost of the phase 2. Ultimately, I think it results in a little over $100,000 in cash payment that they would have to pay to the city at that time.
Yeah.
And I see Mr. Greenfield has maybe something to share, so if you want to address that as well, thank you.
Well, these are the things that keep me up at night. What happens if it doesn't work, or there's also a completion guarantee that's Exhibit H to the development agreement. And anytime you're dealing with an entity like Black Iron, if something happens to the entity and I represent the city, I want to look back and see, well,
who will step in for that entity. And the Billions themselves, personally, have stepped in the form of a completion guarantee that if things are worst case scenario, that's what we would also look for. So one, I don't think it's going to happen. Two, we have a repurchase obligation if it happens as it relates to phase one. We also have liquidated damages as it relates to phase two, and we have a completion guarantee as it relates to all phases. So those are the belts and suspenders on if those things happen. And I don't know if Jim has anything to add or not, but the repurchase is at 85%. Right.
Can you state that for the record, sorry?
When we do the repurchase, we also buy it for 85% of the value, so we also gain 15% there in favor of the city.
Okay, gotcha.
And as long as I'm batting cleanup, Councilor Kiley's question on Lot A, there's some pretty interesting title issues as relates to A and who really owns Lot A, and it was subject to a quiet title action. So when you look at the difference between the 13 and the 15, I don't think Jim and I are going to argue that the condition of title is maybe less than clear, but the developer has been gracious enough to accept a quitclaim deed from the city of Sioux Falls for that Lot A. So they've taken that risk upon themselves. Councilor Staley, as it related to your question on noise abatement and issues with the railroad noise, there's an easement that's attached to the development agreement that was mandated by the Federal Highway Commission that says there is an easement, everybody knows it's a railroad, it's going to continue to be a railroad, it's going to make noise, and it's binding not only on Black Iron, but their successors in title, as well as their tenants. So I feel that that's pretty well covered as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councilor Sale had a question.
No, I was just going to say again, and the end of my deal was that I'm sure it won't happen, but again, just looking at it from the top to bottom and worst case, what could happen, and that was a pretty thorough answer. Thank you.
Sorry for interrupting, Kurt. Councilor Sale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I think my colleagues have done a pretty good job of what if things go wrong. I want to hear what if things go right. You have 10 years to start the second phase. You don't go into something like this without being an optimistic person. What if things go right? How quick could we see phase two development come on board?
Once again, a tough question to answer. Yeah, we are optimists, obviously. My wife has got great vision. She's been down there a long time and has looked forward to this opportunity. But as far as phase two, in the event that there's something, in the marketplace that really pushes urban density and higher volume of people desiring apartment and condo type space, it does give us some time to kind of preload that second phase. So we did push that back as part of negotiations to make sure that we're not committing to something that's too fast, too much now. Yeah, certainly if it's a great success, why wouldn't we want to continue to go with the phase two and go into phase two quicker than 2030? But time will tell. I think Sioux Falls is at a very good economic position right now. I think urbanization throughout the Midwestern cities has shown to be very good. People are liking the downtown. I've been officing downtown now for a little over 3 years, and it's amazing the amount of foot traffic and the amount of desire to be downtown. So we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully sooner than later, though.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Before I go back around, anyone else have any other questions before I go back to those that had additional questions? Okay, Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. I believe during the video fly around, which by the way was a very nice graphic, it was mentioned the glass cubes on the property. And I believe you stated that there's the potential for below grade commercial. Could you address that a little bit more? And if that takes place, when would you actually do that below grade work? in phase one or later on?
Phase one incorporates the glass elements with regard to the subgrade. Subsurface soil tests have been done. We've done extensive drilling as part of the diligence. That all fell upon my wife and I as the developer of this. So during the diligence and some of the delays, we had a outfit out of Minneapolis that does deep drilling to find out where the true subsurface bedrock is, that they don't just hit a small stone and think that that's where the bedrock is. So there's been extensive studies, you know, and a good number of holes that have been drilled to look at where bedrock is. As you go off of south of 8th Street, the soil continues to get deeper and deeper. So it will certainly allow on those areas for some subgrade, you know, retail. The idea really started in a trip to Manhattan. There's an Apple store that's basically just a glass cube. You take a stairwell or elevator that goes down subsurface, but it allows light to come into that space. And so we thought it'd be unique for some, you know, smaller retail type space that is looking for more of that techie, that, you know, something that is memorable for the customer to come in and realize. So, you know, we will probably have a little bit better understanding once we start scraping soils and understand exactly if there's any other subsurface conditions that will disallow, you know, if it's a 2,000 square foot space that's desired and we can only get 15 because of bedrock, then obviously we'll approach that when we know more specifically when we're doing soil removals.
Well, I too have seen this done in other urban areas and other cities around the country, and it's a great way of maximizing the property too and maintaining some green space. So, but it's not necessarily going, it'll be determined how much square footage is available to you below grade.
Correct. Now that we're at this phase, you know, the information is going to be out there. Obviously, there's going to be a vote, and we'll know once that vote is out there to really start marketing the property, see what kind of tenants might be interested in that type of space. The other thing is that it will have some connection also as you look at the courtyard space. There's ample space as you go south of the south part of the new building for underground parking, so there might also allow for some entrance into those retail spaces from the subsurface parking as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good job.
Councilor Staley.
I have never heard of having a parking facility under an area like that with the green space. Or have we done that in Sioux Falls and other places? Maybe Director Cooper can tell us that.
The Lloyd, the new Cascade at Lloyd is doing that as well.
They're having the
Same thing, and a pool too on top of it.
Wow, okay. So I've got a question about property taxes. And help us to understand the progression of the property tax. First of all, on phase 2, the undeveloped, I want to know what those property taxes are going to be based on. And then as this other thing is being built, phase 1, how do we get the property taxes assessed on that as something's being built?
So the property taxes, first to your first question on phase 2, obviously phase 2 is, you know, there's not any improvements that'll be happening. So once if the agreements are approved, ultimately this city-owned land will become privately owned, and then the county will go out there and assess the land value of the phase 2 portion of that. And they're obviously talking about doing also some parking improvements maybe over that site during the interim. And so the county will do that assessment, and ultimately those will come onto the tax rolls. You know, as they do development on phase 1, again, that's all a result of how much is completed during the appraisal process for the county. So ultimately, as soon as this property is sold, this property has a value that the county will have on record basically for the land that exists today. And so that'll be the base value that'll be taxed going forward.
Don't have any idea, like phase 2, how much that's going to be bringing in for a property tax?
Well, I mean, are
right
you
now,
talking after the improvements are made?
No, like right as it's sitting there, because it could be there till 2030, right?
I don't have the estimated value of the property, but I mean, I think that's something that we could find out.
That would be good to know. And then the other thing, so the county's going to be going out there every year and just until it's supposed to be completed in 2020?
Yeah, ultimately, when building permits are pulled from the city, the county is notified, and then once those buildings are completed, they go out and do a final appraisal. In a case for these larger projects, ultimately, you know, there could be 18 months to 2 years, and the county will go out and do an assessment in the interim too. And so, you know, maybe in the first couple of years, they'll see a partial assessment for the property, but ultimately, the full appraised value will be once the project is completed.
If you could let me know what you think that vacant, or that phase 2 would be, I'd appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks.
Councilor Neitzer.
Yeah, I would, the other thing that you could get for us, maybe not urgently, but when we get to the readings, it would be really interesting to know, you must be able to compute about, you know, given what the proposal is, how much property tax, not even talking about the sales tax, how much property tax annually that it would be throwing off, you know, compared to where it would be presumably now, which is 0 if it's owned by the city.
Yeah, I think, you know, we can definitely provide some estimates of what that would be. I would be hesitant to do too much of a detailed presentation on that, just as a result of, you know, a lot of the ultimate square footage and construction of the property hasn't been determined. Obviously, the $32 million for phase 1 is an estimate, but when you think of $32 million, it's not just going to what the building's valued, but it's going to underground parking. Underground parking is going to be valued differently at the county level versus the building construction. And so ultimately, you know, even if we, you know, we could run a number where you take, you know, 50% of the 32 million and figure out what the taxes are. But we can do something like that if you wish. But ultimately, the final numbers are going to be dictated by how the county values the property.
Absolutely, there'd be a gigantic asterisk on it, so not holding anybody to it, but just somewhere in the
we can do
universe, I guess, you know, like with an assumption that it was a $30 million total project and it had $18 million of building, and that it would be.
I mean, we could run an estimate and said, like, if this property was assessed at 16 million or 20 million by the county, we could tell you what the taxes collected per year would be.
And the other question that I did have after all Dave's discussion with all of this things that are happening underground, I mean, I know the city did the soil borings, obviously, and we scraped off 6 inches of dirt, and we found out that it was actually in a lot better shape than we thought. Is there going to be a lot of, you know, is the soil going to have to be remediated like on the Cascade project? Is there, you know, or can you just turn the dirt, put it in a truck, and take it to the landfill? Do we know that yet?
Well, maybe
obviously that's going to be on the developer and their risk, but
yeah, ultimately, you know, one of the things that Jim talked about and why this process has taken so long is during the beginning part of this year, there were some additional testing that the developer took on and had a company come out and do those additional soil testings, as well as where the ground or the underground rock would be, so that they could know the depth. So they do have probably a pretty big book that tells them what the conditions are. Ultimately, with downtown and soil condition downtown, that could change in a 10-foot radius. And so ultimately there are some obstacles there when you get into the dirt. But I don't know if Jim wants to highlight some more of what that maybe study had shown for them originally.
It'd be a massive contingency. I would think they would have done their due diligence, but yeah, so.
Yeah, that was a significant issue as part of the negotiation. It's based upon the reports that we have from Geotech, there is contamination. It's not contamination that has to be shipped out of state. It is soil that either has to be, if it's used on site, it has to be covered with some sort of asphalt, et cetera, or if it is, if that's not possible, then it has to be taken to the Sioux Falls area landfill. And we have cost estimates on that. It's not an insignificant amount of money.
Okay, and just, you know, something that's worth reiterating, a project this big, you could have made quite a bit of asks. You know, they could have asked for TIF. You could have asked for a lot of public infrastructure, so it's a big deal that they're doing all of this. So just want to throw that out, especially if you do have possible qualifying costs, perhaps. I mean, I don't know, that maybe that would have qualified for TIF, you know, so that's noteworthy.
Thank you. Councilor Starr.
Yes, thank you, Councilor. if just to run through the probably not you. I think I need Director Cooper. So we'll keep you guys getting exercise. It's almost like going to church up and down, and we just haven't added the kneeling part yet. So, but just so that I make sure that I'm in my head the numbers. We're seeing this for the first time, but we're selling the land for $2.6 million. There's 4.5 or 05 acres, and it appraised at 2.6. We're selling it for the same amount that the appraised value of the land came back. So that's just more that when I'm able to explain to people
Yes.
what we did.
And
So
there's a portion that we're not selling.
Of the 4 acres, or that's outside of the 4 acres?
It's outside of that. Yep.
Gotcha. So going back to the redevelopment concept plan and looking at how things fill in and where we move forward from here, because I'm excited this is a great project and we move forward. But the remaining 6 acres, how does that break out? And I'm looking at where the existing railroad structure is, the depot part of it. How do we envision that filling in, and how do we market it, and what's the next vision part of this?
Well, assuming that this goes forward in August with your support, the rest of the city-owned rail yard north of 8th Street is still on the table for future consideration of proposals, developer agreements. Initially we did discuss a portion north of 6th Street, and we also discussed that portion between 6th and 8th Street. And so our intent would be, once this project gets the official green light to go forward, we'll look at the downtown market, we'll talk to other developers, adjacent property owners, and continue to have dialogue about when would be the right time to move forward with another future project for the rest of the 6 acres that we own.
So it's fair to say everything south of 8th Street is spoken for as part of this project. So
yes.
The going north is there, so.
Yep, the north 60% is still open for future redevelopment.
Perfect, that's the exact way that I can.
6 acres of the 10.
Gotcha, as people, but there's potentially more land as we look at surrounding development that could be included as part of that 6 acres. It could turn into considerably more or less, or,
Which is similar to what we're seeing with this. The adjacent 8th and Railroad is incorporating some of their property into this proposal. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing any other questions? I just have one. If someone could address, as we look at this map, we see that we were told that there's going to be underground parking. Can you tell me where the entrances are for those? Just kind of curious. I think I might know. I think maybe, but.
Yeah, I can I can address where the entrances are. They're not shown on the graphics here right now because at the time we didn't know exactly where they were going to go. There's actually going to be 2 entrances. On phase 1, where my cursor is at, there's going to be a driveway that'll come down right into here for the first phase parking. As mentioned to us earlier, we are not going to be able to get underground parking under the building because of all the bedrock so shallow. But we're going to have an entrance into the underground parking here that's going to take care of this parking on the first phase. And then the second phase, when this building comes, there'll be an entrance on the west side of the phase 2 building that goes up to the west side. So there'll be two entrances to the lower level. We're just going to build one of them with each phase. So we're keeping the area over here in the middle kind of clear from the driveways that go down to the lower level, because part of this requirement too is there needs to be delivery trucks and things to get into the existing 8th and Railroad through here. And so we didn't have a lot of room to try to build these driveways that go down.
Right.
So one here, and then there'll be another one over there in the future.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just ask a question? Then are the people are you going to be able to get into the building then? There's going to be some connection inside, right? They'll be like walking into it?
Yes, from the underground parking. We see the underground parking, well, for example, where'd my cursor go here? There it is. You know, underground parking that's under this plaza is going to be connected to this building because the residents who live there will want underground parking. Even those who rent office space will want some underground parking. So yeah, the underground parking is connected to the new build, to first phase building, and then it'll be the same will happen when phase 2 comes, the underground parking. Now on this one, we can actually put underground parking under phase 2 because the bedrock is deep enough there. So in all cases, underground parking is connected to the building. And then even as mentioned earlier, if we have retail under here between the glass domes, there'd be access from the underground parking into that from the lower level, as well as deliveries of service and supplies and stuff like that, so.
But the bedrock going into it, then, is that just, you just really have to jackhammer that out? I mean, there's going to be a bedrock thing to get that entrance way in, right?
We're hoping, when we did some more soil borings, of course, we did a lot of soil borings, but we're hoping that right through here, we don't have to jackhammer out very much to get through there. We're kind of designing our underground parking around where we think the bedrock is, because we've taken a lot of soil borings. But there'll be some surprises. As you know, the quartzite in Sioux Falls goes up and down real quick. You go over 10 feet and it moves up and down, and so we're going to do a few more, but we're going to minimize the amount of rock excavation as best we can.
Good. Thank you for your presentation. At this time, we will turn it over to public input on the 2 presentations, Planning and Development Services and also the railroad update. Welcome, Mr. Hirschman.
Scott Hirschman, Sioux Falls. I was glad to see this project. It's pretty cool, and I just hope that we can eventually see who the other proposals were. I know we always do this thing where it's got to be top secret. Can't know who the other proposals were. I don't know why we do that. Hopefully we can see that. I'm also glad to hear that we're not asking for they're not asking for a TIF on this. We're pretty much preparing the whole site for them. There would be no real reason why they should be able to get a TIF on this anyway. Like I said, very excited about the project. It seems like it fit in. But there was some questions Neitzer brought up and Steele about the noise. As a person who lives by a Vera hospital, I can tell you that the train noise is bad. And I still shake my head why we had all this money, this $37 million, and we just handed it over, and we didn't save some of it to improve some quiet zones. We didn't save some of it to study further, moving the trains. The other thing that we talk about is we have to sell this land at a lesser value than what we paid for it because we gave this extra money to Warren Buffett so that he could build a switchyard. Why aren't they using that switchyard? They continue to change and switch cars and store cars only 4 blocks south of this property. Now, I was forwarded an email that Burlington Northern sent to the city claiming that they store approximately 4 to 5 cars. That is a flat out lie. Every weekend I go out and count the cars just south of this property. They store between 40 to 60 cars in that area. They continue to switch the cars in that area. And I understand the traffic is still going to go through here. And it has gotten a lot more traffic ever since we emptied this land out. But something has to be done because the noise level from the trains and the storing of biofuel cars close to our river and close to our parks, this is unacceptable. And I don't understand when we negotiated this deal, $37 million, that we didn't set money aside to create quiet zones and that we didn't tell them, we're giving you this money to build a new switchyard, please use it. Stop switching your cars downtown. We eventually need to find a way to make sure the trains are only moving through downtown. In other words, they stop at the Springer Lumber and drop off lumber. They stop at the steel place and drop off the steel. They give fuel to house oil and keep moving. No stopping. You drop your stuff off, you get out of here. Because I really believe that if we continue to let the trains move the way they are through our downtown, it's going to be a huge detriment to going further and forward and doing more development downtown like this. I really believe that. Because it has gotten, the traffic has gotten more. It just has. I've watched it. I've lived in my house for 16 years. The traffic is double to 3 times of what it was before we emptied this land out. And the whistles blow constantly. It never used to be like that. I'm glad we're going to explore the quiet zones. I wish we would have set money aside to do that, but apparently we're going to have to pull that out of our pockets again. And I think it's time to go back to the drawing board. I know that a lot of people have said to me that you can't negotiate with the federal government. That's what we have our delegation for. We need to call those 3 up, and they need to start working with the federal government, and we need to go back to the drawing board and say, listen, we gave you $37 million. You need to move your trains out of here. That was the original plan and the original goal when this came up. Dave Munson talked about it, John Thune talked about it, Tim Johnson talked about it. It was to reduce the rail traffic downtown so we could develop downtown, make it quiet, and we also need to revisit the decibel levels downtown. So people understand that if you live in residential downtown, like at this place, that it's gonna be a little bit noisier. Instead of calling the city every 5 minutes because they heard a bass guitar. So, trying to say, so thank you.
Anyone else like to speak in regards to these 2 items? Seeing none, we'll adjourn this meeting today. We do not have land use. Our next meeting is 7 o'clock. Thank you.